Hello developers and welcome to the PHP Architect Community Corner, where we have conversations with members of the web development community. I'm your host, Scott Keck-Warren, and on today's episode we're going to talk to James from Vonage about his experience going from a theater major to a dev relations person, what we can learn about Vonage and use as developers, and his two talks that are going to happen at PHP Tech 2024. A trained actor with a curious background, from theater studies to QA to business intelligence development, all the way up to full stack development, James Seconde is the resident specialist PHP developer advocate at global cloud communications giant Vonage. He founded Birmingham, UK's current PHP user group, Birm PHP, as well as being on the Fusion meetup team. He mentors, writes, and speaks on PHP, JavaScript, DevOps, dev relations, and tech culture. James also pretends to be a DJ on the way. Thanks, James, for finding some time to be with us today.
No problem. Thanks for inviting me.
So I have to really quickly ask you about how did you go from theater studies to dev relations?
I think everybody in developer relations, a lot of people I know that end up in developer relations, quite a lot of people, especially in the sort of DevOps space, have quite colourful backgrounds. And a lot of the time it involves you get sort of strange backgrounds like this. I mean, for instance, straight off the top of my head, Salma Alam-Naila, who's very prevalent in she's at some Century or something like that, or one of the others. I can't remember. And she was a music teacher, and so it's like there's this whole teaching as part of developer experience and developer relations. So. Yeah, I'm a trained actor, but was this shows how sort of 90s it is, a computer geek, and well, you know, much to my the disappointment of my parents after they bought me a computer, mostly just sort of hacked an old Apple Performer to pieces and went into ResEdit and started mucking around with resource forks and things like that. So. Trained in acting, went to university and got a degree in. My degree is in English literature and theatre. My dissertation is in stand-up comedy. Specifically, I interviewed a couple of people, including from America. I interviewed Bill Bryson, the travel writer, who was very funny, and a lot of it is manifesting how I do talks. Now I'm inspired by quite a lot of those stand-up comedians, and that, as I now find out after a successful talk in the UK last week, people either love that or hate that. But when I moved to London, I wanted a theatre job, but I needed to pay the bills. So I just went to a temping agency that just sort of, you start off doing, going into an office and stamping paper or doing photocopying or something like that. And the job market was this is 2006. I think it was very different back then when they spotted that I had this sort of, my CV, resume had like sort of computer stuff on it. And so they hired me as an Oracle QA tester. And I hadn't touched a line of SQL before. I'd only been coding in a lot of HTML and CSS, and then HyperCard, which is for the old Mac heads back in the day. And I ended up doing a lot of SQL and then a lot of VBA. Not the most fun I've had. So I had a tech career and a theatre career. And I did actually work theatre at the same time. So I did two jobs in London, classic kind of LA, New York, London, Paris, take your pick of cities where people have two jobs and work themselves to the bone. So I became the technical manager of a fringe theatre, and also I was doing SQL QA, and then I ended up being promoted, and then I started doing business intelligence development, did some bits of Java with SQL, and then thought I wanted to be a full stack developer, really, because what happened was I started going to conferences, and they paid to send me to conferences, and it was all space age. I mean, Docker had only just come out, and people were talking about loads of sort of talking about the fast rise of sort of AWS and things like that. And in my small company, it blew their minds really, and no one really knew what it was. We had like sort of old on-premises Microsoft services, so my career wouldn't go anywhere. So I just chose PHP because I was like, well, people are doing this. So went to a startup, became a full stack developer, and then I've done about 3-4 roles of full stack dev. So when it came to arriving in developer relations, I sort of took a step back and realised I rebooted my city's PHP user group because it had gone dormant, and it just happens for reasons. So I ran a user group, and then I spoke at the user group, and then I spoke at other people's user groups, and then I was doing mentoring and teaching people like PHP. And then, so with all of those things all in mind, one day someone says, do you realise you do developer relations? And I'm like, I don't even know what that is. And it turned out I was just doing that. So all of that has culminated in the fact that, my last 2 jobs have been effectively that. One was heavy in the Laravel ecosystem with a Laravel partner. And now I'm at Vonage, where there's a lot of, I try and balance it between Symfony and Slim and Laravel. But I do a lot of outreach, writing, mentoring, that sort of thing. It's a strange journey. Also, the important thing about my bio that you got slightly wrong is I'm not a DJ. I'm a failed DJ. Or I gave up because it was a lot of effort for zero satisfaction.
That's fair enough. I'm always really fascinated by how people come into technology. There are so many paths, right? Like I went through the university college route in the United States and then became like a programmer that way. But then there's always, I'm always fascinated to hear like, started out doing this and then I switched over to that. So it's always really interesting to hear that kind of information back. And it sounds like being a theater major probably makes you a better presenter because you're used to being up in front of crowds and being in front of people.
It's sort of I don't know. I think it's a sort of a blessing and a curse. You obviously, anyone that wants to go for any audience members in a meetup or usually a conference that wants this quite sort of hardcore specific learning of some major concept. They don't want an entertainer on stage. And some of my talks, I suppose we'll get to those later, but some of the talks I do are pretty straight laced. I mean, the biggest one I originally did in my last job was hooking up Docker and Xdebug and PHP Storm, and that was it. And it's just technical. You can try and shoehorn a bit of comedy into it. The 2 talks that I'm giving at PHP Tech are very, very different. They are complete pole opposites. So sometimes it's good to have the entertainment factor, which I play on. It's one of those things where I don't get nervous when getting on stage because I don't care because I'm trained in acting. So I'm happy doing one of my first talks I did in a pub in Worcester in the UK with my brother in the audience, and there were 7 people in there. And I'll give that the same amount of energy as if there are 1,000 people in the room. I don't really care. It's all the same to me.
I think that there is definitely like a learned component to presenting in front of people. Like, because I have been in presentations or in sessions where the person just kind of drones on and it's as boring as all get out. And so I think like having just somebody who has that kind of background might help improve like the talk. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think so far with a lot of things, it's been mostly positive feedback. But as your profile gets bigger and bigger, suddenly you have to start switching off from the internet because everyone's got opinions and some of them are not very nice. So I've started getting to that stage where I just sort of shut off a little bit. The way that I angle things is very much to do the education and the harmony between education and entertainment or engagement. That's kind of my whole sort of USP of what I do on stage.
I always find it interesting, like getting the feedback from people, and some people will say this was too basic, and some people will say this was too advanced, like for the same session, even.
That always happens. You can't please anyone.
No, I that's what I figured out. Is I'm like I'm gonna do what I do, and as long as most people are like giving me positive vibes, I'm in good shape. So
there's also what we in advocacy what we call the curse of knowledge as well, which you always so every time we write an article, you have to assume that people don't know things. I'm dealing with support tickets that come in the SDK that we have, the PHP SDK, and people still don't know what Composer is. And so you think, well, if I'm going to get on stage, I have my audience for generalist PHP conferences. It's just going to be, I have no idea who's in the audience. So you start off, and I think the way that I structure things, I think a lot of people think is, oh, this is going to be quite basic. But in the last talk that I did in the US, for instance, which was at Longhorn PHP, that was on performance-driven development, it started to go into more technical stuff. So you get the trust of the audience where they realize, hang on a minute, you started off basic for people that are juniors and are learning, but you end up in a place where you have the wounds and the pain and people have seen that you're experienced. That's the way I kind of do things.
Sounds really fascinating. So we have you on today because you work for Vonage, and Vonage has been nice enough to sponsor Tech 2024. And so can you give us just like a brief overview of what Vonage is and what kind of services it provides for developers? Because to me, Vonage is my home phone that I had 20 years ago, in between that weird time where, you know, everybody had home phones and then got high-speed internet and then everybody had cell phones.
I'm very sort of focused on what essentially the division does that I'm part of, is developer experience, and that is the API portion of things. So, yes, Vonage has this history in the US of unified call centers and things and call centers and things like that. I mean, I don't deal with any of that side of the business. It's predominantly, I say predominantly, it's only the API side of things. So there's in this sort of mantra of software in the modern age, I say the modern age, as in now, in the last 15 years or so, is adopted and not sold. That people build from startup levels to even enterprise, have building blocks of SaaS or PaaS. That's software as a service or a platform as a service. So Vonage is what's called a CPaaS, which is communications platform as a service. So we have APIs that automates sending of SMS worldwide and WhatsApp messages if you have a WhatsApp business account. Viber. There's video integrations. So if you want to build, something into your app where there is a live video service on there, it deals with sort of rooms and sessions and hooks things together. Probably quite a big one for us is now coming into the security space. So we've had the two-factor authentication API, which is called the Verify API. Our modern version of it, you can choose what channel you want to use, and you can mix the channels up. So you can use, SMS, which is your getting a text message and putting the code in, but there's WhatsApp on there, there's email on there, there's a cutting edge new style, and there's going to be some demos and things that are coming up in Barcelona next week for this, which is silent authentication. If you want to know more about that, come to Barcelona. I'll be probably doing an article and putting the code out soon, because I've actually got a Laravel silent authentication with a fallback to SMS app built now. So yeah, with the security, with kind of security stuff, we've got some number insights, so you can get more insights onto the number you're using, what network, how active it is. There's new products being launched in that space, but you will have to wait for the big announcements next week about some of those.
That definitely sounds interesting. I'm really curious about what silent authentication is, because that would be huge if there was an easy way to do that.
Anyone at PHP Tech, if you want to see some of that in action, come to the booth and I'll show you.
I'll definitely be hanging out there and checking that out, because we're working on something right now. We're adding two-factor authentication to some of our users, and I'd be really curious to see what other. Right now, it's just like the Microsoft app.
It's a sort of I think this, the way that we approach outreach and developer experience, in the Vonage team, is really we're helping developers solve problems more easily. That's really, so why would you hand roll a two-factor authentication system yourself when you can pull out our SDK in whatever language you want? I mean, yes, I maintain the PHP SDK by hand, but we have a Python one, we have a Ruby one, we have a .NET one, we have a Java one, we have Node, etc., etc. So it's just getting the path of least resistance to use someone else's third-party service. And I think there's there's some give and take with this. That, I mean, R1 is, if you're going to use it, it's an essential core part of your business, and that's it. It's what we do. There's things like, if you want to do, you can use off the shelf auth, and then eventually you'll probably have to bring it in house if your company and your scale and your company gets bigger and bigger. But anyway, that's my talk at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona next week about how to actually scale up and how you pick and choose your SaaS and PaaS and what needs to be refactored in the future and things like that.
That'd be really interesting. I'm like a big fan of when we get to the, like, we need an MVP and we're just like, okay, what are the 80 services that we can plug into to get us this functionality, as opposed to rolling any of it ourselves, because that's just the way to go, right? Like even now, I'm like, authentication, we'll just have somebody else take care of that. That's the way to go now, until you hit that point where you're like, okay, now we got to bring this back in house. And we have a developer who can do that.
I'm doing 2 talks unexpectedly at Tech, but if you want a third talk, I can do the third talk, which I'm doing at MWC, and it's specifically about what you just mentioned.
We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. Attention PHP developers. Did you know that one of the best ways to improve your skills is to attend a conference? It's true, and have I ever got a deal for you? Because PHP Tech is returning for another year of leadership, expertise, and networking all in one event. It's a relaxing atmosphere for tech leaders and developers to share, learn, and grow professionally, while also providing you with the knowledge to solve your everyday problems. You'll learn Xdebug from its creator and how to write sustainable code. So join us April 23rd to April 25th, 2024, just outside of Chicago, Illinois, or online, as all of the talks will be streamed live. If you can't make it during the conference itself, all the talks are going to be available for you to watch later at your convenience. You'll even get access to last year's talks. Tickets are on sale now at tech.phparch.com, or use my link in the description to get a discount. Now back to our video. And we're back with James. So James, you're going to be one of the speakers at PHP Tech. I know you have 2 talks. I forgot to look up what days they are, but do you want to talk a little bit about what our listeners and our viewers can expect to hear from those talks?
Okay, yeah, the 2 talks are very polar opposites. I'm going to go through the second one first, rather than the first one, and I'll explain a little bit about the background of the first one. The second one is on SDKs. So I maintain the PHP SDK for Vonage, but I have in 15 years of cuts and bruises all over my face of dealing with technology and other people's APIs, I've had the experience that a lot of people have maybe had, that are mid or senior or sort of principal architects, which is just dealing with terribleness. And at the way we structure our SDKs at Vonage is, it has to be best practice. We make sure that we've got best in, the best in class. Everything I do is test driven development. That we have to work with versioning from a developer's perspective, because developers are our customers. So from that perspective, it's very obvious that a lot of SDKs, but a lot of startups who are creating products primarily aimed at developers in the same way that Vonage APIs are. There's a lot of knowledge gap where the people that have seen it all before are not talking to the people that are building out SDKs. So this talk is all of the do's and do nots, and here are examples of how to build out an SDK in the same way that I maintained the SDK that I inherited. And I was already familiar with the SDK that I inherited because I inherited it off Chris Tankersley, who I'd been speaking to previously before then, because I took his role as the PHP advocate because he left, and then he came back in a different role. So then I got to hound him about everything else, which is quite sort of an amusing way that ended up. But there are lots of do's and do nots, and it goes into technical detail about how to structure things from a code perspective. There is some engagement in the way that I speak with that, but really that's primarily based on learning for the audience of, look, if you want to do this, you want to make a go of it, here is what I have experienced and here is what you can learn. The first talk is not that at all. The first talk is written as effectively, I'm not going to say it's a stand-up comedy piece because it's not, because you have to be funny in order to do that. It's written as an inspired by stand-up comedy, specifically two British comedians. One probably not familiar from our American audiences. One maybe a little bit more famous. The first one is a man from near me in Stafford in the UK called Dave Gorman, and his comedy was very much evolved around using PowerPoint as his main tool and statistics to do his jokes. And the second one is Eddie Izzard, who is very storytelling driven with the way he directs things. So for the talk on APIs, a history of miserable mistakes and industry mishaps, it's a journey through various terrible things that we've done as an industry. You might, if you don't know the background of the evolution of APIs, might learn something, but really it's written as a collective shared piece for everyone to groan and go, thank goodness we've all been through that. As a sort of hype factor for that, I've been told by my team it's the most unhinged talk I've ever given. Someone came up to me after I gave the talk in my hometown and said, "Are you sure you didn't have a mental breakdown during that talk?" Just assured, I am an actor, so no, I am fine, but I will make it as engaging, as entertaining as possible. And it's a bit nuts, but it's designed to be a bit nuts.
That's the history lesson in industry makes and mishaps, and that's Tuesday just before lunch. So that'll probably be a good palate cleanser before lunch. Absolutely. It's
got hopefully energy levels that will just bring people up just before lunch.
Yeah. I hate presenting just before lunch. I seem to always get slotted into that spot, and it's always just they look like they're about ready to fall asleep and they're hungry, and so
I've been told that really in terms of scheduling it needs to go at the start of the conference or the end of the conference, and then I've been told off by various people within PHP land that really I should have pitched this as a keynote, but. There you go. Maybe I should have done that. I don't know.
I'm really actually quite interested in that SDK tuning one because we don't provide an SDK to people, but we do consume a lot of SDKs that other companies have generated. I'm actually working on an integration with a large company, and the documentation is just miserable.
Oh yeah, that's things like docs feature fairly heavily.
Yeah, so I think that's the biggest thing for me too is because essentially I'm having to become an expert in the software and then also an expert in the API because the concepts fall over and there's nothing in the API documentation that says oh, you don't understand what an account type is? Oh, click over here and you can see that, right? There's just they expect you to be an expert in this company's software and then also be an expert in the API.
Oh yeah, it tends to be sort of there's the mixture of horrendous volumes of domain logic, of actually understanding the business domain and how they've done it versus how the API works, and then they've probably not used semantic versioning. It will just break, and then you're go to the docs, and the docs have all been auto-generated, so they're totally pointless. And have they been auto-generated and deployed recently? Who knows? Classic stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So those both sound like they'll be excellent options for anybody who's coming to tech. Is there anything else that you want us to direct our listeners to your social media accounts or anything at Vonage for people that come and look at? I'm still active on Twitter /X. Sorry, X. I'm still active on it at the moment. I know I'll still continue to post on there. It's very sort of strange ground because it was such a, especially for developer advocacy, was a sort of a massive output where it was sort of everyone all together at once, and people have sort of left and people are not happy with, and I'm certainly not going into that. But I'm also on the PHP Mastodon account under my same name, so that's Seconde J. It's Seconde is the surname. It used to be Seconde with a grave accent. We arrived in the year of the French Revolution mysteriously as a dancing master called Henri Duconde, and no one has ever spoken about it since. So I'm definitely not descended directly from the French royal family and didn't get my head chopped off. That's a true story. So
Those are the socials. I run a conference called Tech Mids. The CFP is open for it. We're doing a sort of a panel this year to select the talks, but it's in quite a large. It's in a massive venue in central Birmingham in the UK. Birmingham is just so everyone knows, the second largest city in the UK. It's the Black Sabbath metal was invented there. Cadbury's chocolate is from there, etc. The Industrial Revolution started there. Those sorts of things. So I would encourage anyone to go to the TechMids conference. I think it's techmids.co.uk. Don't quote me on that. CFP is open. Have a look at that. I'm doing a talk this is going to go out. This podcast is going to go out after I've done it. But for anyone else that is listening to this that runs a meetup or conference, I'm doing a talk that is going to have done its debut, which is possibly as unhinged as the one I mentioned before, and it involves a lot of cowboys at Laracon, India. That will be its debut, and it's written for Laracon, India. It's a big topic. It's a bit of a hot potato. That talk will then be available for your other conferences. And if Ian wants to do and the team want to do Longhorn, please pick it. So that's so naughty.
I apologize. I didn't get I butchered your last name in the introduction. I apologize for that.
No one gets it right. It's fine. No one in the UK gets it right because in England they're like, what's that? So,
thank you again for your time. It was really nice meeting you.
Cool. Thank you very much for inviting me, Scott. It's been a pleasure.
I have to say another heartfelt thank you to James for all of his time today, and thank you for listening to our podcast. If you're not already a subscriber, make sure you subscribe with whatever your preferred method is so you can get episodes as soon as they're released. Maybe share this with your coworkers, and maybe we'll see you at PHP Tech this year. This podcast is available both in an audio version at the PHP Architect website, as well as a video version at our YouTube channel. This is Scott Keck Warren for the PHP Architect Community Corner, signing off and reminding you to keep listening, keep coding, and keep reading.